Welcome to the Top Pod Breakdown, the Joe Rogan Experience. Feel free to like and subscribe for all our content. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Buckle up because today we are diving deep into the world of ibogaine.
Ibogaine. Yeah, it's a fascinating one for sure.
It really is. We're talking about a substance that is making waves for its potential to treat opioid addiction, PTSD, TBI, even Parkinson's and MS.
And what's really remarkable is that it's not some long-term medication regimen we're talking about. It's often a single treatment that seems to have this lasting impact.
Right. It almost sounds too good to be true, which is precisely why we're going to dissect a conversation between Joe Rogan, former Texas Governor Rick Perry, and Kentucky expert Bryan Hubbard. This conversation is from 2025, and they really dig into the science, the personal stories. It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, and I have to admit, having a conservative Republican governor like Perry advocating for ibogaine research, that definitely piqued my interest. It's not every day you see that.
Me too. So let's start with this core idea. Can ibogaine truly reset the brain? What evidence did they present to back up that claim?
Well, they brought up a Stanford study on veterans with PTSD, and the results were pretty astounding. 88% of the participants saw their PTSD symptoms vanish completely after 6 months, and this was after just one ibogaine treatment.
88%. That's incredible. What makes this finding so significant in the context of existing PTSD treatments?
Well, think about it. Traditional therapies often involve years of therapy and medication,
Yeah.
and the success rates vary widely. So the idea that a single treatment could lead to such a high rate of remission is pretty groundbreaking.
Mhm.
It suggests that ibogaine might be working on a much deeper level, maybe even rewiring the brain's response to trauma.
Yeah, it's not just covering up the problem, it's potentially addressing the root cause.
Exactly. And there's another anecdote from the conversation that really stood out to me. They talked about a Parkinson's patient who regained his mobility after ibogaine treatment. What's really interesting is that this patient had been immobile even after undergoing deep brain stimulation.
Okay, so we're seeing potential benefits across a range of neurological conditions. But before we go any further, let's take a step back. What exactly is ibogaine?
Sure, ibogaine is a psychoactive alkaloid that's found in the root bark of the iboga plant, which is native to West Central Africa. Traditionally, it's been used in spiritual and healing ceremonies. In therapeutic settings, ibogaine is usually administered under strict medical supervision because of its potent psychoactive effects.
And that brings us to Governor Perry, who seems like the least likely advocate for this type of treatment. How did a staunchly conservative, anti-drug politician become such a vocal supporter of ibogaine research?
Well, his journey seems to have started with a commitment to helping veterans, especially those struggling with PTSD and opioid addiction. He was first introduced to ibogaine through Marcus Luttrell, a Navy SEAL who credits ibogaine with saving his life after he returned from a really harrowing mission in Afghanistan.
So Perry's interest in ibogaine came from a desire to find real solutions for veterans who were suffering.
Exactly. Yeah. And it wasn't just a theoretical interest for him. His wife also had a profound experience with ibogaine, and that seems to have really shifted his perspective on the potential of this substance.
It's a great example of how personal experiences can change deeply held beliefs and open us up to new possibilities.
Absolutely. Sometimes you have to see something firsthand to truly understand its power.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like that's been the case for a lot of people who have encountered ibogaine.
Now, in addition to Governor Perry, we have Bryan Hubbard, whose background adds another really interesting layer to this conversation. His story is pretty remarkable. Tell me more about what led him to become such a passionate advocate for ibogaine.
Well, Hubbard started out as a workers' compensation lawyer in Kentucky, where he saw the devastating effects of the opioid epidemic firsthand. He then went on to lead Kentucky's Social Security disability system and the Office of Medicaid Fraud and Abuse Control.
So he was in a position to see just how broken the system was.
Exactly. He saw how ineffective traditional treatments were and how many people were just falling through the cracks. That experience, along with his own personal experiences and family history, which included struggles with addiction, it all fueled his desire to find better solutions.
Yeah.
And that's what ultimately led him to ibogaine.
So we have Governor Perry, driven by his commitment to veterans and personal experience, and we have Bryan Hubbard, motivated by his professional experiences and a desire for better treatment options. It seems like they both arrived at ibogaine from very different paths, but with this shared sense of urgency and hope.
Yeah, that convergence is really fascinating. It shows how ibogaine is starting to transcend political and ideological divides, bringing together people from all walks of life who see its potential.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing, right? There was a big initiative in Kentucky to fund ibogaine research. that ultimately didn't succeed.
That's right. Hubbard spearheaded the Kentucky Ibogaine Initiative, a really ambitious effort to establish the state as a leader in ibogaine research. He organized these public hearings, inviting people to share their experiences with ibogaine. And the testimonies were really powerful. People shared stories of overcoming addiction, finding relief from PTSD, reclaiming their lives. It was really moving stuff.
So there was a lot of grassroots support for the initiative.
Definitely. And it wasn't just anecdotal evidence either. Even scientists from the FDA acknowledged that the cardiac risks associated with ibogaine, while they are real, they shouldn't be a barrier to research if they can be managed properly.
So what happened? Why didn't the initiative get off the ground?
Well, it seems that despite the compelling evidence and public support, the initiative ran into some pretty significant political and logistical roadblocks. There were concerns about the safety of ibogaine, the lack of established treatment protocols, and the potential for controversy. It's a familiar story, unfortunately.
Yeah, it sounds like a case of a promising solution getting bogged down in bureaucracy and fear of the unknown.
It really does. But the story doesn't end there. While the Kentucky initiative may have stalled out, it definitely planted seeds that are starting to sprout elsewhere.
Okay, so here's where things get really interesting. Tell me about what happened next.
Yeah, it seems like the Kentucky initiative, even though it didn't succeed, it really caught people's attention. And that sparked interest in other states.
Like Texas?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Governor Perry saw an opportunity to kind of pick up where Kentucky left off. He saw Texas, with its strong medical infrastructure and its business-friendly climate, as the perfect place to really push ibogaine research forward.
So Texas could become like a hub for ibogaine research and treatment.
That's the idea. He wanted to attract private investment, create a model that other states could follow. And it's not just Texas either. We're seeing more and more interest in places like Ohio, Washington, Arizona. It seems like there's a real shift happening where people are starting to realize that we need new and innovative solutions to these really complex problems like addiction and mental health crises.
Yeah, it's encouraging to see that momentum building. But even with all this interest and all these promising anecdotal stories, I imagine there are still some pretty big challenges, right? We can't just jump ahead without the science.
You're absolutely right. While the anecdotal evidence is really compelling, we need more rigorous scientific research to fully understand how ibogaine works, what its potential benefits are, and what risks might be involved. And that research needs to be conducted in safe and controlled environments with well-designed clinical trials.
Yeah, you can't skip the science. It's crucial for establishing ibogaine's legitimacy and ensuring it can be used safely and responsibly.
Exactly. And there's ongoing work to address the cardiac risks associated with ibogaine. For example, some research suggests that co-administering magnesium might help mitigate those risks. So while caution is definitely warranted, it's not a reason to just dismiss ibogaine's potential altogether.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from the science to the personal stories to the political landscape. But I want to go back to something that really struck me in this conversation. Hubbard refers to ibogaine not just as a treatment, but as a divine medication. He talks about it as something designed to help us reconnect with a sense of purpose and belonging.
Yes, that was a really powerful statement. He even went on to describe contemporary American society as brutally dehumanizing
Yeah.
and hostile to individual identity.
Wow, those are some strong words. What do you make of that perspective?
Well, I think it speaks to a deeper truth about the struggles we're facing today. Addiction, trauma, mental health issues, these are often symptoms of a deeper disconnect, a loss of meaning and purpose in a world that can feel increasingly fragmented and isolating.
So you're saying ibogaine's potential goes beyond just treating the symptoms. It's about addressing a more fundamental human need for connection and meaning.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. If ibogaine can actually help people reconnect with themselves, with their communities, with something larger than themselves, could be part of a bigger solution, not just for individual healing, but for societal healing as well.
That's a really profound question. It makes you think about how we define healing in the first place. Is it just about getting rid of symptoms, or is it about something more holistic, something that encompasses the spiritual and existential parts of being human?
Yeah, it's a question worth pondering. And while we wait for more research and hopefully a change in policy, there are things we can do right now to engage with this topic and maybe even contribute to its advancement.
Like what can our listeners do if they're interested in learning more or getting involved?
Well, for starters, there's a ton of information available online. I highly recommend checking out those public hearings from the Kentucky initiative that we mentioned earlier. They offer a really fascinating and often moving look into the power of ibogaine, through the eyes of the people who have actually benefited from it.
And what if someone's listening in Texas, where Governor Perry is really championing this initiative? What can they do to show their support?
Reach out to your state representatives. Let them know that you support the Texas Ibogaine Initiative. Governor Perry and Hubbard are relying on public support to make this a reality.
Yeah, don't underestimate the power of making your voice heard. You can also look into ways to support organizations that are doing groundbreaking work in this field.
Exactly. Groups like VETS, MAPS, and the Hefter Research Institute are all playing a vital role in advancing research and education around ibogaine and other psychedelic therapies.
And even something as simple as sharing this deep dive with your friends and family can help spread awareness and get these important conversations started.
I think that's so important. This isn't just about ibogaine. It's about being open to new possibilities, challenging the way we think about things, and exploring every avenue to address the really complex issues facing our world today.
It feels like we're at a real crossroads, right?
It really does. And ibogaine seems to be becoming this focal point for a much larger conversation about how we approach healing, both individually and as a society.
And about who gets to decide what's considered legitimate medicine and treatment.
Yeah, that's a really important point. The pushback against the Kentucky Initiative and the stigma that still surrounds ibogaine, it all highlights the power dynamics at play. Who gets to decide what's safe, what's effective, and what's even acceptable?
It's a reminder that science and medicine aren't always objective. They're influenced by social, cultural, and political forces.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so crucial to have these discussions, to question assumptions, and to fight for a more inclusive and holistic approach to healthcare.
So where do we go from here? What does the future hold for ibogaine?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is, but it feels like it's about more than just ibogaine, doesn't it?
You're right. It's about our willingness to confront uncomfortable truths, to challenge the status quo, and to embrace the possibility of radical change.
And to remember that healing isn't a destination, it's a journey.
Well said. And it's a journey we're all on together. It really does feel like we're at this turning point in how we think about addiction and mental health.
Yeah, like we're finally starting to realize that you can't just treat these things in isolation.
Exactly. We need to zoom out and look at the bigger picture, all the social, cultural, even spiritual factors that contribute to suffering.
And that maybe some of the ways we're approaching these issues now are actually making things worse.
Right. Think about the pharmaceutical industry for a second.
Okay.
This whole focus on symptom management and profits, it's created a system where people are over-medicated, and they're not actually getting the help they need.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg.
Yeah, exactly. And ibogaine kind of represents this radical shift. It's not about masking the symptoms, it's about getting to the root of the problem, addressing the underlying trauma, the disconnect that often drives addiction and mental health issues.
It's about actually healing.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so threatening to the status quo. It challenges the way things are done, the power structures. It offers this glimpse of a completely different way forward.
It makes you wonder what else is possible if we were more open to exploring these alternative approaches.
That's the big takeaway for me from this whole deep dive into ibogaine. It's about broadening our understanding of what healing can be. It reminds us that there are many paths to well-being, and that we need to be open to exploring all of them.
And to question the assumptions that hold us back.
Absolutely. Just because something is unconventional or outside the mainstream doesn't mean it's not valuable.
So why should our listeners care about all of this? Why is ibogaine important?
Well, on an individual level, it could offer real hope for people who are struggling with addiction, with trauma, with mental health challenges. It's not a cure-all, but it does represent a potential breakthrough in how we understand and treat these issues.
And what about on a societal level?
On a societal level, it's a call to action. It's an invitation to have a deeper conversation about how we create a world that supports healing, a world that values connection and meaning.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together, that we have this shared responsibility to create a more just and compassionate society.
Exactly. And that starts with being informed, questioning the things we take for granted, and advocating for change.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm feeling this mix of hope and urgency. Hope because of people like Governor Perry and Bryan Hubbard, who are really pushing to bring ibogaine to the forefront.
And urgency, because the need is so great. We're facing this epidemic of addiction and mental health challenges. We can't afford to dismiss potential solutions, even if they seem radical.
So what can our listeners do to get involved?
Educate yourself. Learn as much as you can about ibogaine and other alternative approaches to healing. Share what you learn with others. support organizations doing important work in this field, and most importantly, stay engaged. Don't let this be a one-time thing.
Don't let this be the end of the conversation.
Exactly. Let it be the beginning of a lifelong journey of exploration, learning, and action.
Because in the end, it's up to all of us to create the kind of world we want to live in. A world where healing is possible, where connection is valued, and where everyone has the chance to thrive.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Ibogaine. We hope you found it insightful and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
And we hope it motivates you to keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Until next time.